What are some techniques that you use for people who have porn addiction? Like, how do you help them get through that?
I think a lot of it is like understanding their emotions. So when I think about pornography addiction, so remember that any addiction brings pleasure and takes away pain. So if you can reduce the need to take away pain, then you're going to melt away the pornography addiction. So there are a couple of things that are correlated with pornography addiction. So if you look at multivariate regression analyses, there are two variables that correlate very highly with pornography addiction. One of them is meaninglessness in life. Mm-hmm. So generally speaking, if you can help someone have a reason not to watch pornography and jerk off in the middle of the day, then that will help them a lot. Mm-hmm. So what happens is, this is my population, but like, these are people who are oftentimes young men in their 20s, and they're like falling behind in some way. And it's like 4 p.m. on a Thursday, they're not really working, and like, what else do they have to do? Mm-hmm. So as we start building a life of meaning, like the need for pornography seems to decrease. That's one thing. The second thing is that oftentimes, remember, this is emotional regulation, mm-hmm. and people will have a lot of stored emotions from things like traumatic experiences growing up, romantic relationships, all kinds of other stuff. So as we metabolize that storehouse of emotion, it becomes easier to manage emotions from day to day. They're kind of like built up, and your mind kind of stores them in the subconscious. So if we look at something like processing trauma, so I do a lot of like trauma processing for people with pornography addiction. And that sort of takes some of the gas out of the tank that's mm-hmm. fueling the addiction. The third thing to do is to reduce emotions in the present. So teach them alternate coping mechanisms that they can use to manage emotions. And oftentimes it's like really life-oriented stuff. So if I'm living at home and my parents are toxic, like learning to set better boundaries is one of the best things to teach someone who struggles with pornography addiction. Because usually what's going on is these are people that have someone in their life who is sending them toxicity, but they feel so guilty at cutting them out. This can even be someone like a romantic partner or spouse. It can be a parent. And as they're like receiving the stress, it's almost like I'll joke with some of my patients that you have an emotional umbilical cord. They're connected to someone else, and another human is like transmitting negative emotions to them like a waste product. And then they have to turn to substances or pornography or whatever to like offload that emotional stuff. So boundary setting, emotional regulation techniques, processing trauma, and like really building purpose in life tends to be like a pretty good outcomes.
So many things come to mind, but I think we're seeing, particularly in young men, like we know that amounts of sex or frequency of sex is decreasing, and that the even birth rates are decreasing. And so do you think this is sort of part of all of this, like external stimulation that's around, and then they feel sort of, this is a theory for me, right? They feel less meaning, right? Because they're not actually having success in finding someone or meeting someone, or it's just easier to access pornography. And then they're like, they're still not connecting with other people. They're using pornography because they still feel bad. Of course, we talked about the cycle a little bit, but is it sort of like, are these things contributing to that?
When you say these things, what do you mean?
Like, meaning, are we seeing people get porn addiction because they're either having stress in their life? So say they're not coupled with somebody, say they are trying to meet people, but they're having difficulty, because I think the dating world has changed, right? With dating apps and how people communicate and meet each other. It's very different from when you and I were younger. And so I think that is a very different sort of place to navigate. Like, women are looking for a certain kind of man, and if you don't fill that category, you are immediately filtered out, right? So women are dating the top 5-10% of men, are trying to aim for them, and then there's a lot of men who are not having success in meeting women.